I recently picked up this really cool box set from Perry Miniatures called Travel Battles. It's been out for a while, but this is the first time I'm seeing it, so obviously I had to buy it. This is technically a board game, but what's really cool about it, if you're a Napoleonics fan like me, is that it comes with literally everything. It comes with 4 dice, 2 red and 2 blue, and it also comes with the entire game board. These two boards together represent the entire battlefield, and then you also get these cool 8mm miniatures by Perry Miniatures. You will get 4 sprues, 2 blue and 2 red, but actually they're all exactly the same figures. It also comes with green bases and some trees, and some houses that you're going to be able to add to the tabletop. And of course, it comes with a manual on how to play this board game, but I've also heard that this can be played with Perry Miniatures Valor and Fortitude rules. More to come on that in a future video. In this video, I'm going to be focusing on painting, but before I paint, I'm going to be removing these little pieces of the sprue right here. Just go ahead and cut them off, but otherwise leave all the figures on the sprue. It'll make it much easier to paint. And getting rid of these little pieces of sprue allows you to paint those hats a lot easier later. Also, cut off these treetops right here and then use a blade to clean up any excess plastic like I'm showing here. Now, while I was looking through the manual, this caught my eye. In the painting tips, the very first box over here says, just paint on it. You don't have to prime or anything. Which was surprising to me because I always prime. But challenge accepted, I will paint on bare plastic. Throughout this video, I'm going to be using this book as my uniform reference. Let's start with the British Army. The classic British uniform are grey pants with red tunics and black shackles, and for a majority of the infantry, I will be painting them this way. For the pants color, I'm going to be using Ash Gray by Army Painter Fanatic Paints, and I'm going to be painting only the pants of all the models. Now for all the British soldiers, regardless of whether they're infantry, artillery, or cavalry, I'm going to go ahead and paint them with this gray color. I also paint a few horses with this gray as well. I randomize 1 or 2 horses per sprue and paint those gray. Now you notice I am not painting over the tunic areas. I'm leaving those red. I'm actually going to be using the color of the bare plastic. I know, gasp, since this sprue is already in red, why paint over the red areas? Just leave it bare red plastic. I must admit that this gives me a lot of anxiety because I don't usually paint this way. I'm challenging myself to go a little bit outside of my comfort zone and do something different. These models are pretty tiny, so I might be able to get away with this. I next use Barbarian Flesh Fanatic paints and I apply it onto all the faces of the models. This is going to go on literally every model's face. These are tiny models, so no need to change the skin tone, just leave it all the same across all the models, and it has that fair complexion which you would expect from European troops. On the infantry units, you'll want to be painting their hands as well. Just a slight dab of paint in these areas will make it look very convincingly like hands. Moving on to the carriage of the British cannons, I'm going to be using Army Green Fanatic paint and applying them onto these areas of the cannon carriage. Now, I'm going to be using a slightly different green color for the French. Generally, they're all around the same hue of green, but I keep this slightly lighter green for the British, and then I have a darker green for the French later. I next use Weapon Bronze Metallic paint and I paint the gun itself in this bronze color. I next use Matte Black Fanatic paint and I apply this onto all the shackles and the hats of all the troops. This includes all the infantry as well as any of the light cavalry, heavy cavalry, and so on. I just put the same color across all the British models. I also decide to paint a few of the horses black. I randomize 2 or 3 horses, maybe even 4, that I can paint black. I go ahead and apply it across both sprues. The bicorn hat for the brigadier generals also get black. I also paint the shoes black. And same goes for the artillery crew. On the back of the models, a majority of them are going to feature either a backpack or a knapsack. Go ahead and paint all those black. Next, we're going to be painting the tunics of the artillerymen. Now, British artillerymen during the Napoleonic era actually wore blue tunics, like I'm showing here. So I'm going to be using ultramarine blue by Army Painter Fanatic Paints, and I will be applying them very carefully onto the tunics of the artillery crewmen without getting in onto the faces or onto the pants. So you want to go slightly slower here and apply the blue on like I'm showing. I'm also going to be using this ultramarine blue on the dragoons. The dragoons, like I'm showing here, during the Napoleonic Wars, used to wear blue tunics as well. So I'm going to be applying it onto these light cavalry models. There are about 6 of them, and I apply it onto all their tunics, like so. I also hit the saddle cloths of all the light cavalry with the same ultramarine blue. For the British heavy cavalry, I'm going to be using this simple scheme right here. I'm going to be keeping them in the red tunics, but I am going to be applying some of that ultramarine blue onto the saddle cloths right here on all the heavy cavalry units. The Brigadier General's saddle cloth gets blue as well. While I was painting, I was starting to get a little bit bored of all the red tunics, so I said, hey, why don't I introduce some Corsican Rangers into my infantry? For this, I use Angel Green, which is a very dark Fanatic paint green color, and I apply it onto the tunics of about 2 of these stands of infantry, which means one of these units would be Corsican Rangers. And let's be honest, what British Army would be complete without the infamous 95th Rifles? And for these guys, I'm going to be using the same Angel's Green, but I'm going to be applying it onto the entire model like I'm showing here. And yes, I realized that I'm painting over the gray that I had painted earlier, but hey, I really wanted 95th Rifles, so I did it anyway. Honestly, if I had thought about this from the beginning, I would have probably painted everything green before I applied any of the black or the skin tones or anything else. But hey, it's okay. Here I'm just putting the flesh tone back on the hands because I had painted over it with the green earlier. Next, I'm going to switch to leather brown acrylic paint, and I'm going to be applying this onto all the muskets. Part of the buttstock is below the hand, and then there's the rest of the stock above it. I just paint everything brown. I also use this brown on the flagpole of the heavy infantry or the guard models. This brown also works really well on the horses. I pick a few at random and paint them this leather brown color. Also, at the back of the infantry models, some of the muskets would be visible, so go ahead and paint those leather brown as well. I also use this leather brown to paint the hair of all the models. I just give them a nice light brown hair. Of course, I can vary the color of the hair if I really wanted to, but these are really itsy bitsy tiny models, and it's really not worth going through that trouble. So giving them all brown hair is completely fine here. Next, I use matte white, and the first thing I do is paint the remaining horses. Whatever horses that are still in red plastic, I go ahead and paint these white, and this will round up all the horse colors. It makes everything look nice and random and gives it some interest. With a small detailing brush, I apply it onto all the cross straps on all the different models, namely the infantry. You'll be applying it like this. And even though you may overshoot a little bit past the 3-dimensional shape of the straps, don't worry about it. There's a step later called washes, which will take care of a lot of these tiny mishaps. So don't sweat it too much. Besides the guys with regular red uniforms, the Corsican Rangers over here also get this white cross strap. But when you get to the cross strap of the 95th Rifles, you are not going to use white. Instead, you're going to use black. So whip out that matte black again and apply black onto the cross straps. Historically, that's how the 95th Rifles used to be uniformed. Switching back to white, I decided to put some white on this one flag for the guard models here, just to give it a little bit of a different color. Note that for the leader model here on the guards, it's just one cross strap, not two. The artillerymen also get white cross straps, so be sure to paint those. And then for any of the horse riders, I apply a dab of white right on their hands. This is to basically make them look like they're wearing white gloves, which is historically how they used to dress. I also paint the sashes around the waists of the Brigadier Generals white as well. And I paint these pouches on the sides of the light cavalry white also. For the heavy cavalry models, I paint the front of their tunics with a stripe of white. And for the light cavalry models, I apply an accent of white on the very top of their shakos. To introduce some variety into my models, I picked one of the light cavalry units and painted the front of their tunics yellow. And also for variety and a splash of color, I apply some yellow onto the flags of the other guard unit. I next switched to plate mail metal metallic paint, and this is going to go on all the swords and sabers of all the cavalry models. It also goes on all the scabbards on the sides of the Brigadier General and the heavy cavalry units. They have scabbards on the sides of the horses, like I'm showing here. I also paint this sword on the leader of the guard model. I next use greedy gold metallic paint and I apply it onto the front plates of all the shakos of the guard models only. I leave the rest of the shakos black. This allows the guard models to stand out a little bit and look a little bit more special. And then I also apply it onto the very top of the flagstaff on the guard models. For the officer, I apply a little dot on his bicorn, and then after that I also apply it on the epaulettes or the shoulders of the officer. To give all the cavalry models a little bit more bling, I do apply some gold to the front of their shakos and helmets as well. It makes them look a little bit more special and really stand out on the tabletop. Next, I like to create some variety in the horses. I reuse any of the browns, grays, whites, and blacks that I used earlier that are still on my wet palette, and I apply it onto the tails and manes of the horses randomly. I usually would apply different colors on the horse that contrast with the horse. For instance, here if it's a brown horse, I put some black mane and tail. And over here on a gray horse, I also put some black mane, black tail. And then I just kind of vary the colors, like over here, black horse, white mane, white tail, and so on. It just gives the horses some variety and prevents them from looking monotonous. Finally, I applied some gray onto these areas of the heavy cavalry. Honestly, you could leave them red because historically sometimes they would fold up their greatcoats that way, but I like the gray to give it a little bit of more contrast. To bring everything together, I used some dark wash and some water, 80% wash, 20% water, and then I liberally apply it onto all the models like this. This wash covers up all the minor mistakes, makes everything look nice and crisp, and also gives it that natural shading that makes these models truly come alive and look 3D. Make sure that these things are fully dried before you move on to the next step. But before that, let's paint up some French. The French traditionally wore blue tunics with white pants, and a lot of them had a white stripe going down the middle of their tunics, and then they would wear either black hats or black shakos. As usual, I'm going to take advantage of the natural blue that these models came with, and then I would apply the white only to the trousers of the models. Unlike the British, I do not apply white onto all the trousers. I apply it onto a vast majority of the infantry, and for some I also applied this white stripe right down their torso like this. But there are going to be some models that I'm going to be portraying as light infantry. Those models were fully blue, so there are going to be some of them that I will leave completely blue and not paint them at all. I also applied this white onto some of the horses at random, about 2 to 3, maybe even 4. And it should be worth noting that the guard models here, which I'm going to be portraying as old guards, do have white pants, so paint those up in white. And the guard also had white in front of their tunics like this. For all the Brigadier General models, I do paint all their pants white as well. They traditionally wore white pants. Now moving on to the light cavalry, I picked this particular paint scheme for one of the cavalry units. They're going to have red pants and red shakos. For this, I use pure red acrylic paint and I apply it onto just the pant area of these models, and then I also apply it onto the shakos, which are the caps on top of their heads. Now continuing this painting fun, I picked one of the heavy cavalry units and portrayed them as cuirassiers. So these guys are going to have some minor red trimmings along their epaulettes. So I just applied some of the same pure red acrylic paint onto their shoulders. For the second light cavalry unit, I'm going to be portraying them as full green, like this, in green uniforms. I also wanted to make the uniforms a little bit of a brighter green. So for this, I use green skin acrylic paint and I apply it all over the rider from head to toe, like you're seeing right here. And I do this for 3 of these units. And together on a base, they will look like the French 7th Hussars that I'm trying to portray here. Now that I'm done with most of the major colors, I'm going to go to Barbarian Flesh and apply it onto all the faces on all the models. And then also on the infantry models, you want to paint their hands with dabs of this Barbarian Flesh color to show exposed hands. You also remember that I mentioned the light infantry. The French had special infantry models that wore entirely blue uniforms like this. And so for these models, you leave the model entirely blue in its original blue plastic, and then just paint the faces and the hands of the models with the Barbarian Flesh paint. I painted 2 units of light infantry this way. And it's the same thing with the artillerymen. The French had pure blue uniforms for most of their foot artillery, like it's showing here. So for those models as well, leave them completely blue and then just paint their faces and hands. I continue applying this flesh tone onto all the rest of my remaining models, as you can see here on the light cavalry, and then also on the heavy cavalry, and then on the brigadier generals, and so on. Next, I use oak brown, which is a nice dark brown, and I apply it onto some of the horses. So the reason why I'm using this color is to give a little bit of a different look of the French army compared to the British. Now, because the sprues are all physically identical, using different colors is the only way to truly tell the units and models apart. For the artillery, I'm going to be using a darker green compared to the British. I'm going to be using angel green. It's a nice dark green, and this is going to go on the carriages of the guns. It will make it look visually different from the British when they're on the tabletop. For the guns themselves, I'm going to be using the same weapon bronze as I used for the British. There's really no need to change this color. There's enough color differences everywhere else to tell them apart. At this point, I wanted to play around with colors a little bit more, so I decided to make my last heavy cavalry unit a carabinier. These guys have striking white uniforms all the way through, so I apply it onto the entire rider and also onto the saddle cloth underneath them. This may seem like a really plain scheme, but once you apply the washes to it, they really do stand out. The next color is leather brown acrylic paint, and I apply it first onto some of the horses. I pick 2 or 3 of them and paint them in this light brown color. Just like the British units before this, I apply this same brown onto all the muskets on any of the infantry models. Again, on the guard command unit, I paint this flagpole this brown as well. Here on the all blue light infantry, I also paint their muskets. You'll see that the natural blue color of the resin really does work well as a uniform color. I paint these knapsacks on the light cavalry in leather brown, And then after that, I turn to the backs of the infantry to apply these onto the backs of their muskets. And then also I apply this little brown onto their hair to make all the models look like they have brown hair. And I just go ahead and do that with all the models regardless of who they are. I just make them all have brown hair. I next grab some matte black paint and I apply this onto the horses that are remaining. Anything that looks like blue horses, because of the blue plastic, I paint those black. I also paint the shackles of all the infantrymen in black as well. The bicorn hats on any of the commander models get black. And the backpacks on the backs of any of the models, which usually are the infantry and the artillerymen, also get this matte black color. Next, I'm going to use this black to paint these tall boots on all of the heavy cavalry, on the carabiniers, as well as on the cuirassiers. On the generals and on the light cavalry, I paint their shoes in this black, preferring low-cut shoes to high boots for these models. For these cuirassier heavy cavalry, I'm going to be painting their helmets black. And for the same cuirassier, I'm going to be using this plate mail metallic paint to paint their breastplate or their cuirass. I just applied the silver onto the front and the rear of their torsos, where the tunics would usually go, and I just make sure not to get it onto their faces or onto their red epaulettes that I painted earlier. Next, I use the silver in the same way that I did with the British. For any of the exposed swords, sabers, or scabbards, I paint those silver. And I also make sure to paint the sword of the guard leader model with the silver as well. Now for some white detailing work, I use a small brush and then I apply this onto all the cross straps of the blue models, which are namely the light infantry models here. I apply them onto the cross straps like so. And you don't have to do this with the other models that you had painted a white patch in the front of their tunic. Those are already painted white. Also remember to paint the sashes of the commanders in white and then apply dabs of these onto the hands of all the riders that are on horses to make them look like they have white gloves. I next use greedy gold to create some accenting. I start first with the helmets of the carabiniers. They are all in gold, which makes them look really resplendent and special. I apply them here. And then after that, I use the gold on all the epaulettes as well as this center dot on the bicorn hat of the commanders. Now the French Guard models used to have this very elaborate headgear with a nice bright gold piece on the very front of the helmets. So I'm going to do the same thing here. For any of the guard models, I apply a dab of gold at the very front of their shackles to make them look like those tall hats that the guards used to wear. I also apply the same gold dots onto the shackles and the helmets of all the cavalry models to make them stand out a little bit. Don't forget to paint the very top of the flagstaff gold as well. I finish off all the remaining bedrolls with some uniform gray. These are these areas of the light cavalry and also here on the heavy cavalry. And next, similar to what I did to the British, I use the remaining blacks, whites, browns, and grays, and I paint the different mane and tail colors on the various horses to give them variety, like I'm showing here. And now to bring everything together, I use 80% of dark tone with 20% water, mix them together, and then liberally apply it onto all these French models to create the correct contrasting of light versus dark, darker shadows, and also it allows all the minor details on all these models to really pop to the surface. Be sure everything is 100% dry and then apply 1 to 2 coats of varnish onto all of it to protect your paintwork. Next, use some hobby clippers and clip all your models off of your sprues. Make sure that all the varnish is completely dry before you do this, obviously, but you can just cut these off. All the sprue residue are actually on the very bases of the models, so you don't really have to run it over with a blade afterwards. Just cut them off, and then after that, you'll want to take a set of bases like this per army, and then using plastic glue, apply it onto the bases and then apply the models onto the bases so that they look like this. Since these are such tiny 8mm models, you want to use very fine flocking material like this. This is usually used for railroad sets and it works really well for this. You want to use some Elmer's glue or white glue, then dunk the model into the flocking and it will stick to the base like this. For this, one of the pro tips I would do is use an old pointy tip brush. This will help you get the Elmer's glue into little tiny nooks and crannies. Here are the finished British infantry. And here are the French infantry. The 2 British artillery pieces. And the French counter battery. Here are the British light and heavy cavalry, and the opposing French hussars, carabiniers, and cuirassiers. Let's start working on the game board. First, you want to cut out all these houses, get them off the sprue, and then after that, there's going to be some sprue residue on them, so you want to take your hobby knife to clean off any sprue residue before you start applying some plastic cement and assembling the houses together. Once the houses are done, you can actually paint the houses while they're loose, or you can just go ahead and glue them onto the board like I'm showing here. I actually don't mind painting anything fully assembled, as you can tell from a lot of my videos, so I was okay with them already being on the board. But if it makes you a little bit more comfortable painting the houses separately, that is completely fine too. Time to start painting. Now these treetops are already fully green. You don't have to do much here except apply some strong tone wash onto them like this. Liberally apply the wash right out of the bottle onto the treetops like this, and then just allow them to dry. For the game boards, I'm going to be using leather brown and oak brown. These are 2 differing shades of brown. I use the darker oak brown for all the roads. I use a pointy end brush and then I just kind of trace this dark brown color onto all the roads like this. I next use leather brown and I apply it onto all the farm fields right here. I apply the color with the grain so you don't have to fight it as much. And then just wherever you see grids that look like farm fields, go ahead and paint it this lighter brown color. I also use this leather brown for all the trunks of the trees or these wooded areas right here. You'll want to paint the periphery on the outside of the trees like this, and also paint the inside of it brown just to kind of demarcate whenever troops are inside the woods, that you know that these brown squares are considered woods. For the houses, I use skeleton bone and leather brown. Skeleton bone goes on the main structure of the house all the way around like this. And as you can see, I am okay painting with it fully assembled onto the board like this, but if it makes you more comfortable, it might actually be easier to paint these houses when they're off the board. So it's completely up to you. I don't mind either way. And then after that, you want to switch to leather brown and then apply it onto the roofs of the houses like this, and you would paint all the houses the same way. It's really up to you. You can make all the houses look slightly different, but I like the general uniform look that all the houses have the same color schemes. It just makes the board look a little bit more uniform. To make the fences on the sides of the houses stand out a little bit more, I use uniform gray and I paint these areas right here. Whichever looks like standing fences, I put this gray on. It just changes the color scheme a little bit from the houses, which prevents that monotone look. For all these newly painted areas, I'm going to be using soft tone and strong tone washes. Starting with soft tone, I apply this onto all the squares that have the farm grids on it like this with the light brown color. Applying the soft tone creates a more light look to it, and it's not going to be as dark. I next switched to strong tone, and I use this on all the roads, and then I also apply this onto all the houses. Whenever you apply it on the houses, be careful of coffee staining. Sometimes it can get a little bit too strong in certain areas, so just make sure to wash it off with a clean brush. You can also apply this onto all the wooded areas, and it creates a slightly darker tone. At this point, you can be done with the board, but I decided to go one step further by applying some Elmer's glue carefully into each of the squares like this. I carefully trace it into each square like I'm showing here, and I do little bits at a time. And then after you get enough glue on each of the squares, I go ahead and apply some of this flocking that I used earlier for the bases, and I apply it onto the game board like this, and I just kind of keep on going in small sections of 4, 6, or 8 squares at a time, and then apply the flocking as such, allowing them to dry completely to create a more realistic and organic appearance to your game board. This is purely optional. You don't have to do it, but it really makes the game board look really good. Once the glue and paint dry, apply 2 to 3 layers of matte clear varnish to protect your work. And at this point, your entire tabletop battle set is completely done, and you are ready to do battle in this very exciting and compact tabletop game. Thank you for watching the video, and I hope this encourages you to pick up this tabletop game as well. This was really fun to work on, and I cannot wait to play it. Be sure to stay tuned for a demo battle coming up.